Hi, everybody. Susan Storm here from Psychology Junkie. I think I said hi, everybody, too fast. But hey, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We are going to be talking about the Trickster function today. I'm sorry we're just a couple minutes late, but we are excited to dive into this complicated and interesting function with you today. Again, if you're just tuning in, my name is Susan Storm. I'm the founder of PsychologyJunkie.com, where you can find over 1,000 articles about the Myers-Briggs personality types, the Enneagram types. And I'm joined today by Denzel Mensah. Denzel, can you tell people a little bit about yourself and where they can find you?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Denzel Mensah. I'm an ENFJ. For those of you all who are familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a 9-wing-1 social sexual subtype, and I'm a life personal development and relationship coach. I also have a YouTube channel underneath Denzel Mensah. I talk about MBTI / Myers-Briggs. I talk about Enneagram. I talk about philosophy. I talk about relationships. Anything having to do with relationships, I'm down for it. And a lot of other types of concepts like spirituality and things of that nature. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about the trickster function today.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So just if you're just tuning in and you've never heard of the trickster function, you've never heard of shadow functions, or maybe don't even know what cognitive functions are, I would encourage you to go back to some of our previous live streams because this might be kind of heavy. Um, like if you just know, hey, I think I'm an introvert and I'm maybe an ISFP, but I don't really know what those letters mean, then as we're talking about things like trickster functions and cognitive functions, it might feel a little overwhelming. But if you have like a basic understanding of the cognitive functions and the preferences and what those mean, then you might also get a lot out of this, or just stay anyway and have fun with us. And if there's anything you don't understand, just let us know in the comments. We want you to be part of the stream. This is an interactive experience, so don't feel like you have to wait till a certain time to ask a question. If a question arises in your mind, just type it into the comments and we'll be happy to try to answer it for you. Sometimes the questions get complicated and even I think, I don't know about Denzel, but I've had some moments of like, ooh, that's a good question, but I don't really know exactly how to answer that on the spot. But we
Yeah,
want to hear the questions anyway.
we're both, and okay, actually, I just realized I ran the simulation and I was like, oh, some NP might get offended by me saying this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. We are both NJ types. And so, being answered something like having to answer something on the spot will be kind of like, ooh, if we haven't like thought about that already, or like we don't really have like the pattern for it, then we're very slow to like actually speaking on it as much because we really want to make sure the information tracks. Whereas like, NPs, they usually pattern in the moment. So that's why I said we're not NP types. Like they'd probably be able to like, it would look like they're BSing, but they're actually like, throwing stuff out there that could be possibilities. So that's why I said that. Anyway,
Yeah,
let's
I
continue.
agree with you. I agree with you. Yeah, maybe we need to have like a guest NP. But yeah, there's even if you stump us with your questions, we still want to hear the questions
Yeah.
because we care about you guys. We want this to be something that's actually helping people. So if there's a way that we can help, we want to know. So ask us your questions and let us know if you need more clarity on something. So we've been going through a series about all the cognitive function placements from dominant all the way down to through the 8th function. And today we're on the 7th function, the trickster function. And let me go ahead and put the slides up here. So the trickster is the 7th out in your 8 function stack. And the 8 function cognitive function stack is something that psychologist John Beebe came up with to describe how people deal with the unconscious and conscious sides of their personality type. So when you look at a cognitive function stack, say you're an INFP and you've been online, you've like looked up INFP cognitive function stack, what you'll usually see are the ego-syntonic functions. These 4 functions that are shown here: the hero or dominant function, the mother, father, or auxiliary function, third function, eternal child, and inferior function, the animus. So we have talked about those in previous live streams. So if you don't know what those are, feel free to go back to jump back to those previous live streams on my YouTube channel, and you can watch our discussions on those. And then you get into our more unconscious functions. These are the shadow functions. And we've talked about the opposing role. That's the shadow to your dominant function. We've talked about the critical parent, which is the shadow to your auxiliary function. It's your 6th function. And today we're talking about the trickster. So the shadow is essentially the side of yourself that you're not as conscious of. You use it regularly, just like you use your left hand if you're right-handed, and you don't really use it as easily or as with as much control, but you're still using it. You still use the shadow side of your personality type, but you're usually not as conscious of how you're using it, and you usually tend to use it in a more reactive, defensive way. All right, so the trickster, what is it? This is the shadow sibling of the third function, the eternal child, so your tertiary function. So like the tertiary function, the trickster is childlike, but not in an innocent or helpless way. So the third function in your stack tends to have a very vulnerable, childish, innocent quality to it. The trickster is not like that. It tends to defend us through manipulation, humor, trickery, and deception. The trickster doesn't care about rules, regulations, or boundaries, but it can also be a catalyst for individuation. The way I like to think of the trickster is, imagine you have a family, and there's a little kid at home, and he keeps hearing about the older brother who was sent off to prison or something like that because the older brother was getting into all kinds of trouble. Well, the older brother comes back, and the little kid at home, he's really innocent and sweet, and he goes out, and other kids are picking on him and things like that, and the little kid doesn't know what to do. The trickster will then go and fight for the little kid, but he'll do it in all the ways that the little kid wouldn't do it. The trickster is like the protective, a street smart sibling that essentially doesn't care about the law, the rules, or anything that other people take so seriously. It just wants to mess with people to protect the tertiary function. So it's we'll talk about later is John Beebe said that a lot of times that your third function, your tertiary function, it doesn't feel comfortable being expressed enough until you have some development of your trickster function. So a lot of times the trickster function develops actually fairly early on because of the fact that the tertiary function feels like it needs that in order to feel safe. And like I said, if you're listening to this and you're like, holy cow, I don't know what she's talking about, it's okay. Feel free to go back to some of the earlier live streams where you can get a better idea of like where this is all coming from. This is a quote by Mark Hunziker, who wrote the book Depth Typology. He's a Jungian analyst. He said, the trickster is both destroyer and creator. It breaks down self-limiting structures, creating disorder in order to open up new options that lead to a new order. By destroying or ignoring boundaries, the trickster often plays a pivotal role in our psychological development beyond self-imposed societal or parental limits. And then we've got a couple quotes here by John Beebe. The trickster is, among other things, the archetype of autonomy from parental patterns. It is not uncommon for children to develop some skill and comfort in using their seventh trickster function attitude in response to the overwhelming power of their parents. And lastly, from John Beebe, it appears that in order for the tertiary function attitude child to develop, the seventh function attitude trickster must first become sufficiently differentiated to come to its defense, to make it safe enough for the child to come out of hiding and become conscious. So this function can react in very negative ways. Like all shadow functions, it can be very reactive and not really well thought out and controlled. But it's also important. The shadow functions have good things about them. They also have bad things about them if you do not work at differentiating them. But you can see that it's an important protector for the tertiary function. And it's also one of the ways that we do grow beyond parental external limits. It's a kind of a rebellious side of ourselves. These are some common traits or energies of the trickster function. It can be deceptive. I'm going to say can be because it's not always. Shifty, it's independent, sly, humorous, daring, playful, rebellious, rule-breaking, rash, and reactive. Now, it's not all of these things all at once. Maybe it can be all at once, but there's just hints of these things in relationship to it. And I'm going to now ask Denzel. Denzel, do you have any thoughts so far on this function?
Yeah, I like I like the idea of how the trickster function pretty much is necessary. It's kind of like it's the twin of the tertiary function. Like, they're both children, but this one, it's kind of like, there's one that's like an eternal child that's like, oh, like give me attention in this way. And then it's somehow like archetypally making me think of Hermes, like if we're thinking of Apollo, the Greek god Apollo, and then we're also thinking of Hermes, like Apollo, had Zeus's attention and wanted Zeus's attention and everything. And Hermes also wanted Zeus's attention, but the way that Hermes got Zeus's attention, like he loved Apollo and Apollo loved Hermes, but yeah, the way that he got Zeus, the way that Hermes got Zeus's attention a lot of times was by playing tricks, and like, doing a whole bunch of like mischievous things, like flashing a smile in a way, being deceptive, being shifty, sly, all of that. And it seemed like everybody in Olympus kind of just was like, oh, you silly Hermes, like in that kind of way. So I like how, Susan said that the trickster function is not necessarily always, being this malicious kind of thing. Because again, you could be like, working on yourself, a very healthy person could have like a very healthy integrated shadow side. But yeah, when they're not really integrated in that way, then yeah, the trickster function can actually be very manipulative and create a lot of paradoxes. It likes to put others in a context where they can't get out, and then it creates mischief alongside that, and it's pretty much seen as like an obnoxious and sneaky child, because it's the shadow version of the eternal child. And so when you think of that kind of archetype or that kind of energy throughout this stream, then that'll really like help you to be able to like make sense of how it shows up for you, like identify like what function that is in your seventh slot, and then be able to be like, okay, like if I'm thinking of like, this kind of energy of an obnoxious, sneaky child who, wants attention and everything, but is not doing it in the same way that the eternal child is doing it, and creates double binds. I think that's a very big thing that John Beebe said, like creating double binds and everything like that. How do you see yourself doing this with that function? And that's kind of like the energy that I see for it.
Thank you, Denzel. That's great. That's great input. And Hermes is a great example. And I think also, even in some ways, maybe Loki, the god of mischief, like that. That's a great example also of trickster energy. And one of the things that's interesting is that, the tertiary function is it's one that we want to receive love in that way. And the trickster function is one that tries to get people off its back. So both functions are about interacting with the outer world to some degree, but whereas the tertiary function is like, I want to be loved and like supported here, the trickster function is usually trying to evade something, like trying to get people stuck so that they're out of the hot seat in some way, or to react defensively against an attack that they feel is being directed towards the tertiary function. We'll get more into that later, but all right, so here's the focus. I guess this is what's going to be on this slide. While all the shadow functions can affect us and others, the primary focus of the trickster is to get others off our backs and to defend the tertiary function, the child, from attacks from others. In a healthy way, the trickster can also help us to think outside the box and break boundaries that are holding us back. We can also become more aware of our manipulative or deceitful tendencies when we become aware of this function. So I've run into people, I don't know, Denzel, I'm sure you have, I know you have, who are like, I'm never manipulative. I'm never like, I never do these things. Whenever someone does that, they do. But sometimes we think we're never manipulative. We think we're never tricky. We think we never manipulate situations. And becoming conscious of this function can help make you conscious of the ways in which we all actually can manipulate situations. But it takes time to even realize it, because becoming conscious of our shadow functions and when we've used them is a lot harder than becoming conscious of our egosyntonic primary functions and how we use them, because they're in the shadow. They're not as clear to us. And sometimes it helps to talk to someone else and they can see it a little bit more clearly than we can. Double binding. This is something Denzel mentioned. He was talking about how the trickster gets us stuck in double binds. It can make you or others feel double bound, like there are no good options, so you feel stuck. You're in a lose-lose situation. For example, an ETP, an ESTP or ENTP with trickster introverted feeling might feel double bound when someone tries to get at the motivations or deeper personal feelings behind what they're doing. They might feel like they're being cornered, trapped, tricked, or that no answer they give will be the right one. And we'll get more into like each type in future slides, like how this can show up. But a lot of times when someone is trying to get at someone's trickster function in a relationship, friendship, or in some way, that person can feel cornered. They can feel like, oh, no matter what I do, I'm going to lose. I'm not going to be in a good situation. Sometimes, so sometimes they're projecting that intent onto the other person. They're projecting that the feeling that, oh, this person is trying to trap me, even if that other person is not trying to trap them. And then what they can do is they can turn it back on them and try to catch that other person in a double bind by saying like, what are your values? What do you stand for? What are your motives in doing this? And so they can, it has this dynamic interplay between other people and how they're acting. And often the trickster arises when they feel some kind of restrictive parental type of energy from another person, especially in those situations. Again, Denzel, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think that aside from the details coming up soon, I feel like you've actually covered this really well.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. All right, so we're going to dive right into now how this shows up for the 16 types. We're going to start with the ESxJs, ESFJs, and ESTJs. These types have trickster introverted intuition. So some of the ways this can show up. They may feel suspicious that people who are making inferences or predictions are manipulative or deceptive. They may make deceptive predictions about what will inevitably happen in order to trap someone or get them off their back. They may come up with dark premonitions that are weirdly funny and subversive. They may trap people by telling them that they're confirming all their worst fears about them. I have in quotes, I just knew you were this kind of person, or I just had a feeling a long time ago that you were going to be this way. They may mock or make fun of people who seem drawn to deeper meanings or abstract ideas. At times, they may deeply appreciate symbolism or laugh about their own fears of the future. Once a type starts differentiating the trickster function, then they are able to laugh about their weaknesses in that area and have a little bit of humor around it. There's always a sort of sense of humor, often a sense of humor around the trickster function. It's why you when you make fun of people, sometimes you're making fun of people who have these qualities, who have like ESJs. They might be more apt to make fun of people who have this kind of like deeper abstract focus. They might find themselves playfully mocking them or things like that because it just seems so ridiculous to them. But as they learn to differentiate this function, they can start to appreciate things like symbolism, like reading between the lines and noticing these bigger abstract themes in situations. Denzel, I'm going to hand it over to you. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on, have you seen any examples of this with ESJs, or do you have any thoughts about this at all?
Yeah, so this is again interesting, but first, I took profiler in profiler dynamics on Personality Hacker. They talk a lot about BB's model and everything, and one of the things that Antonia Dodge of Personality Hacker does is she has an inner dialogue. I did this with the last function. So she has like an inner dialogue for all of the types and how, like what could be said for each function in that sense. So with the trickster introvert intuition, it's kind of a little bit different for the ESTJ and the ESFJ. So I just wanted to read those out like real quickly. The first quote is, this is for ESTJ. I see Ni as woo-woo. Theories are interesting, but not when we're trying to get stuff done. It always sounds pretentious. I know the future. Sure you do. The stars chat with you. Do they? I do find worldviews pretty funny, and I like to mess with people's perceptions. And then the second quote is, who gets to define what's deep? I have goals. I don't need some overarching meaning of life. I can come up with predictions about other people's futures too. Doesn't mean I'm right. If I get an insight into my future, but it undermines my goals, I would just ignore it. So that's, what ESTJs would have to say about it. And then an ESFJ, similar, but a little bit different. I see Ni as pretentious. Theories are interesting, but not when you think you know people better than themselves. I know how people think. Sure you do. What am I thinking right now then? I do find worldviews like the ESxJ pretty funny, and I like to mess with people's perceptions. So you can see the double bind here. Who gets to define what's deep? I have fulfillment. I don't need some overarching meaning of life. I can come up with predictions about other people's futures too. Doesn't mean I'm right. If I get an insight into my future, but it undermines my goals, I'll just ignore it. So with those quotes, with those like inner dialogues, you can see again like that kind of like that double bind nature, and also like the suspiciousness of people who have that function as a trickster function, but then also like people who like when they're perceiving Ni. So with that, you'll see the ESJs, like, like we said, like, oh, sure, you can read the stars. So like, sure, you can like actually like, you're hearing this from the universe or whatever. Like they see everything as like so like woo in that sense. But when it comes to, being a little bit more sneaky and a little bit more like maneuver like, they know how to be able to put themselves or other people in a position to where it's like they're using either that other person's own sense of woo, their own sense of like perception, their own sense of like, oh, well, the world is saying this. So now what? And it's messing with their perceptions because they know like, okay, like I know this is how you think. And so I'm going to use the way that you think to be able to mess with the way that you think, especially because I don't even actually believe what I think about, what you think. So that sounds a little bit confusing, but pretty much it's them using Ni, but in a way to only like trick and be like mischievous towards other people who are using Ni. So it's yeah, I don't know, like it's kind of like meta, and this might be the hardest one to like really understand in that sense. But yeah, that's what I've seen in a few cases as well. I feel like Regina George from Mean Girls, I think that we see this pretty well with her. I actually believe that she's an ESFJ. And I'm talking about the Mean Girls that we all know and love, not the one that's coming out soon. We do not know what that is yet. I do not know what type Regina George will be in that or whatever like that. But I do believe that she's an ESFJ in Mean Girls. And I feel like you can see a lot of this in her as well. Like, like she's able to use other people's perceptions to be able to kind of like shift and like use things to like her own advantage. And I feel like that's like, it's almost like okay, I don't believe this for myself, but I know that other people believe this, or this person believes this, whatever. So I'm going to use this in order to kind of like get what I want because I think it's funny, which kind of like creates that paradox.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And I think Regina George is a great example of an unhealthy ESFJ.
Unhealthy ESFJ, yes.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. So one of the ways that the trickster introverted intuition would show up is in defense of child extroverted intuition. And just as a real life example, there was once a time when I was talking to an ESTJ, and they were throwing out these possibilities about something that was like related to people, like, and why they do what they do. But it was very like they're doing it this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. And I remember criticizing that and being like, I think maybe that this is a narrow view of like what's actually not a narrow view, but I think you're like getting beside the point, and like what's really going on here could be this. And this ESTJ like came back at me with this, well, I've always known that you see the world in this fundamentally different and flawed way from how I see the world. And like, I've always had this feeling about you that you and me are just like two totally different people, and you'll never understand, like you just will never like see like things as the way I see them. And it was just this very like condescending, but also like I always knew something about you. And that's one thing I've seen like with ESJs when they start getting defensive sometimes over their child function, is they get this like, I always knew you were this way, or always had this premonition about you that you were one way or another. And then the other person is like, wait, what? Where's this coming from? And then they don't know how to get out of that situation. But I do want to say, like, talking about the trickster is hard. Like, there is not, like, we've been over this before. With a lot of Myers-Briggs type content, there's a lot of stuff out there about it. There's a lot of examples. There's a lot of people sharing how they use their dominant, how they use their tertiary, how they experience their inferior. When you start getting into the shadow functions, it's much more esoteric and there's just not as much information. So, as I was even writing these slides and coming up with them, I was like, oh my gosh, like there's no one else who's written this in a really structured way. I mean, Denzel, I'm really glad that you have some of the stuff that Antonia has shared. But as you're watching this, if you're like, hey, let me give an example of how I experience my trickster function, we'd love to hear that, because the more examples we can get, the better we can make content around this. All right, so let's talk about trickster extroverted intuition. Extroverted intuition is the trickster function for ISFPs and ISTPs. And these are just some of the ways it can show up. They may feel like extroverted intuitive types are manipulating or deceiving them. They may throw out what-if scenarios or random connections in order to trap people or get them off their backs. Like, oh yeah, what if you meant this or that or the other thing? Like, what if we think about this or that? And it's in a way to like get people to like lose situation. They may make fun of people who bring up a lot of hypotheses or possibilities that seem random. They may feel like people throwing out possibilities and ideas are trying to trap them or render them indecisive. They may come up with random possibilities that are very dark and uncouth, but oddly funny. At times, they may have fun toying with multiple unlikely scenarios or laughing at the random ideas they come up with. Again, I'm going to hand it over to Denzel. Any thoughts on this trickster with ISFPs and ISTPs?
Yeah, so again with the the dialogue, for the seventh function for ISTP, it could be, I can't take NE seriously. Their ideas are ridiculous, and sometimes they seem like they're up to something. Brainstorming is a waste of time. Look, we came up with 1,000 ideas that are going nowhere, but if someone tries to trick me, I'll mess with them until they leave. So you see that double bind thing going on again. And again, you see it over with the second one. I hate going meta when I want to be in the experience of life, but sometimes a ridiculous idea is needed to show people how unrealistic they are. I make fun of them and they don't even know I'm doing it. Sometimes when I've tried everything, I just wish I had a creative solution. So again, you could even see this like with ISFPs as well. It's kind of like, it's that ability, that trickster ability, is that what makes it so interesting is that it's both being mocked and ridiculed, like within itself and at other people, but then it's also using itself to be able to get to other people. But then it's also using it to like, protect the tertiary or the eternal child. And so those are like the two biggest things. So when it comes to the ISP, then you see extroverted intuition, being kind of like, oh man, like I'm literally just trying to enjoy Kings Island right now, or Six Flags right now, or I'm trying to like explore this in whatever type of way, and I'm trying to like analyze it in this sense, and people are just throwing out these wacky ideas of some sort, and it's like, you know what? It's almost like what we were just saying with the ESJ. Like, let me join in on the wacky idea thing too. And they throw something in there as well, because, ISPs actually do tend to have a really big sense of humor. And it's their way of being able to show you, again, like just how foolish this might be. But then it kind of like puts you in a double bind, because it's now like showing you like, okay, it's like, okay, the person is using this same exact function. It's almost like straw manning. It's like the person is using that same exact function, but it's using it to be able to ridicule the function itself, especially the other person who's using that function. And so when it comes to like the ISPs, then yeah, they will tend to use it in a way where it's like they're trying to like teach you something, like, oh yeah, like I came up with like 1,000 ideas or whatever, and guess what? None of them work. But like they said, if someone tries to trick me, then I'll mess with them until they leave. And so they have the ability to be able to tap into that ability more, but it's more used in like a defensive way. Like, oh, I can outdo you with extroverted intuition, because they're protecting their NI. Like, oh, somebody's trying to get in my head, then I'm going to use extroverted intuition to like maneuver and trick them out to protect the eternal child of getting into my head. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes sense to me, but I've been also like, I think it's a good example, and I think it's the only way you can explain it. Like, explaining the shadow functions is complicated, and like it's, if you're just watching or reading about shadow functions, you're like, yeah, this is as easy as, I don't know, making a recipe for pancakes. Then like, you're probably not understanding it correctly.
Right.
Like, it's gonna take some time to like really think it through. But everything you said is true, and as we go, I'm trying to think of examples. One example I had, and I don't know if this is a really great example, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I have an ISFP in my family that Denzel knows.
Yes.
And she was at a party, like, with other teenagers. And there was this teenager, they were supposed to be playing a game. And this other teenager was like getting really argumentative, but it was about Greek mythology. It was like just throwing out all these ideas about Greek mythology that were like criticizing it, but like from all these weird angles. And this ISFP was just like getting annoyed with this person because she actually really is into Greek mythology. But she's also like, oh, well, I have thoughts about Greek mythology too. I also have thoughts about Norse mythology. And then she just started like throwing out all this stuff about mythology that this person didn't know. And the other person was just like, and like, well, you think about it this way or this way or this way or this way, or do we actually want to just play freeze tag now?
That is a perfect example. That's a perfect example.
I wasn't sure.
I think so. I think so because it's using. It's like, okay, the ISFP knew about Greek mythology themselves, and the other person kind of like ridiculing it in a way, or like bring up whatever. Instead of the ISFP like being like direct in a way that's like, hey, it's like, okay, I'm gonna like use some form of like my own confusion and trickery to be able to showcase like how like you really actually don't know anything of what you're talking about. And by throwing out all of these other like options and these other like ideas, like I think that it was like further proving that a lot of this stuff can also be like it's also just like what's the point? And let's just focus on reality. Like, again, like, let's get back to like reality. Like, can we get back to like just playing tag? But I know about a lot of this stuff too. Like, and if somebody tries to trick me, I'll outdo them. And so I think that's like the same kind of like energy in that archetype.
Yeah. It's kind of fun. I critical parent was kind of a rough thing to be learning about. I think getting into your critical parent can be hard, and talking about it can be difficult. Trickster's a little bit more funny. Like, if you notice like a humorous / manipulative edge on someone, it's more likely to be trickster. Whereas if it's critical parent, there's more likely to be a very harsh, dismissive, critical energy. Noticing the energies of people is so important. And trickster's a little bit more fun than like honestly oppositional and critical parent roles, because it's usually getting people stuck, but in this way that's like it's lighter. It's like rebellious and funny and rule breaking. It's just not as heavy as like the critical parent can feel when it's coming across.
Yeah, most definitely.
Let's look at Trickster Introverted Sensing. This is in the ENFJ and ENTJ types, so I'd love to hear Denzel's thoughts on this one. May feel like introverted sensing types are manipulating or deceiving them. May remind people of past experiences in order to trap people or get them off their backs. Like, remember when you did this thing? May make fun of people who go into a lot of detail about the past or traditions. Like, people who are really into minutia. Like, they might just be like in the back, like, oh yeah, let's hear more about your toaster oven, why don't we, or something like that. They may feel like people reminding them of their past are trying to trap them or play them. May bring up uncouth or bizarre things from their past that are oddly funny, but perhaps subversive. At times, they may have fun reviewing the past for lessons or humor and laughing about their emotional nostalgia. All right, so again, Denzel, you're an ENFJ, so why don't you take it from here?
Sure. So when it comes to like the ENFJs and ENTJs, their inner dialogue when it comes to this function is, I see SI as too fussy in particular, and I roll my eyes about it. Routines are so boring. It's silly to over-identify with your family if I feel attacked. It's silly to over-identify with your family. If I feel attacked, I'll use our shared past against people. I remember what they've done to me. I'll criticize SI without allowing it redemption. And then the second quote is, routines are boring. I set them up but I can't help sabotaging them. If I forget to eat for a day or two, it doesn't matter. It's ridiculous what details people pay attention to. You really think you're going to care in 20 years? I point out people's history to illustrate how silly they are. So again, it's kind of like what we were just talking about with the ISFP, where it's like, again, like for all of these, you are using that function to point out how dumb that function is. And it's in a very like, trickster way, because, and that's why it's like a trickster. And that's why we call it like a double bind, because it's putting the other person who's using that function in a double bind, or it's putting yourself in a double bind, because it's like, all right, I'm using the function to prove this point. So clearly the function is not completely useless, because it's almost like a paradox. It's like, well, I'm using someone's history to show them just how dumb over relying on their history would work. But clearly, if they look at their history, they'll be able to realize, oh, looking at my history doesn't really work. So it's like a paradox, because then from looking at their history, they're able to identify, oh, looking at my history doesn't work. But then they wouldn't have been able to identify that unless if they looked at their history. So now you're like playing this kind of like game. And that whole thing, I will say for me, I don't actually know. Nope. That's that. Yep. Nope. That's actually no, very, very not true. That's very much not true. Yeah, very much not true. Forget that I even just said that. So what I will say is that whole piece about remembering what somebody did. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I know for myself, it's more like I want to present you the evidence or the receipts, so that once I do present it, then there's no way that you can get out of it, which is the double bind. It's like, okay, usually I'm not paying attention to the past history and stuff like that, or whatever. But now all of a sudden I have a goal. Now it's like, oh, this person has irritated me by doing this thing. Let me collect the amount of times with concrete evidence of them doing this thing. And then when I reach like 3 to 4 times that they've done this specific thing, I haven't said anything about it. I'm just collecting it, which is, very passive aggressive in this way, but I'm just collecting it. Now I'm going to bring it up to attention. Like, you have a tendency to do XYZ. In fact, back in July, this is what happened with this. And then back in this time, here's this example. And so it's almost like having the receipts ready so that the person has no choice but to submit to the things that you're bringing up to them. But at the same time, the ENJ still thinks that having receipts, or like having, pretty much having this this over reliance on history is dumb, until all of a sudden they need to use it to be able to, I guess, advance forward, and get themselves out of a tight space.
Yeah, that's a good example. I think so. Yeah, and I know like an ENTJ who, they tend to just get real annoyed when people start getting into like the details of something, like in a like in-depth way. For example, like they might be trying to have a conversation about something that needs to be done, and then someone will be like, oh, yeah, I was going to the store to pick up this thing, but there was traffic on this lane, and then also coming from this way, that street that's over at this thing, and they start giving all these details, which introverted sensing tends to like giving the sequential details and not leaving things out as much. The ENTJ in this kind of a situation, which I saw play out a lot, would be like, oh yes, let's hear more about what the traffic was like on 6th Avenue, because that'll really help us to get our get going on our goals here. Like, thank you so much for sharing that. Do you have more to share? Because I was thinking that you have this habit of and it's kind of like they're making fun of them using the function that they're using.
It's not kind of, it is. That's exactly what it is.
It's not kind. It's like, I'm making fun of your SI by fake using SI. And that's one thing I've noticed with Trickster a lot, is it'll make fun of the function by fake using the function. And I'll get into how I do this. Unfortunately, I do. I'm guilty. But you know, and so that's another thing to look out for. If you're like trying to figure out what your trickster function is, think about like, what do I make fun of by imitating it? And sometimes that can give you a little clue about where it might be coming from. That's not always the case. We can make fun of plenty of things, but there is a tendency to like always interpret and use this function in kind of a playful, mocking way that just it's not really respectful. At least that's my opinion. I don't know what you think, Denzel.
Yeah, no, I think that I think I agree with that. Again, it's something that all of these I'm still patterning myself. But I think that conceptually, like, you know, it makes sense. And from what I've seen so far, yeah, that's what it is. And if we're thinking of like the archetype, you can already tell like the different kind of flavor that the trickster has compared to like the last two functions that we did, where those were like a little bit more like critical, you know, like the critical parent, or like, you know, it's like, okay, this person's like actually upset right now, versus like with the trickster, it's not even like being like upset. It's just, it's like mischievous, it's playful, it's a child. So it's just like, okay, yeah, like I love the example, Susan, like, you know, both with the ISFP and then even the ENJ, because like it's so true. It's like, yeah, let's just point out all of the things here by using this exact thing. It's like if somebody is using a I don't know, a broom to try to like clean, and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, you know, and there's like a wet floor, and you're like, you take the brooms, like, yeah, let's just use this broom to like start like mopping the floor in that way. Clearly, you're trying to show like how the broom is ineffective, but the broom has its specific places. So sometimes people are using that broom in the wrong situation, you know. But then the situations where they're actually using it like properly, then hopefully that's not where we're using our trickster function to try to point out like where you're using the function like improperly. But yeah, if it's not being used properly in certain situations, then somebody with the trickster function will definitely quickly bring up like how foolish it is to do that in a non-direct way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Denzel. I love you always come up with the greatest metaphors. um yeah, and so sometimes when people are, you're seeing their energy of that, it doesn't seem necessarily like harsh and critical. It's just like playful and humorous, but some part of it, the person who's exhibiting this trickster function might feel wounded. It's usually the tertiary child function that feels a little bit wounded, so then the trickster is taking the wheel. Not always, but often, because again, the trickster is kind of like the evil bodyguard. Not evil, it's not an evil function, it's the rule breaking rebellious bodyguard of like your tertiary function.
Yeah.
Let's talk about trickster extroverted sensing in INFPs and INTPs. These types may feel like extroverted sensing types are trying to manipulate or deceive them. They may remind people of what's relevant or happening now to trap them or get them off their back. Did you even notice this thing? They may feel like people pushing them to be in the present moment or pay attention to details around them are trying to trap them in a lose-lose situation. They may mock or make fun of people who are physically responsive and realistic. I'm not real happy with how I wrote that, because I mean, how do you make fun of someone for being realistic? It's more like to make fun of these really like physical, like responsive, like action-y oriented people. They may point out things that are happening in the present moment in an uncouth, trollish, or subversive way. At times, they may have fun being in the present moment or laugh at their lack of comfort with physical details. So when they get more comfortable with this trickster function, they can kind of like laugh at themselves when they miss something obvious and kind of have a little bit of fun and lightheartedness with it. And so, yeah, Denzel, let's see what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I really do love this one is one of them that I actually do see in real life a lot. And the funny thing is, like, because it has to do with real life. So you'll see for the trickster, you'll see a lot of INPs who pretty much don't think that they need much experience because they can understand something conceptually. And I think that's actually what you mean. When you Susan, when you were like talking about like, oh, you know, like they're making fun of people like for being like too realistic in a way, because it's just like, oh yeah, you have to experience all of that, right? And so it's almost like yeah, sure, well, yeah, I can't write a book about, you know, a scuba diver or like a fiction story about a scuba diver unless if I go scuba diving myself, huh? You know, and like just kind of like making fun of it in that way. So here's some of the inner dialogue. We'll do the INTP and the INFP. The INTP first. I don't see the need to experience anything directly. There you go. I can understand it through research. I'll take care of my body through discipline and optimizing, not by listening to it. I don't care where I am, gray padded walls or a forest. I often end up feeling malice, shrug. And then the second INTP one is sometimes people need a reality check. It's funny how people copy each other like sheep. They are meant to be they are meant to be mocked. I don't like putting myself in physically awkward situations. So if I have to, I'll turn it into a big joke. I've missed opportunities by refusing to look foolish. And then lastly, the INFP one is kind of similar, but a little bit different. I don't see the need to experience anything directly. I can understand it through other people's stories. I'll get into nature, but I don't listen to my body. I listen to my feelings. I struggle to get into action. I often end up feeling malise, the shrug. And then the last one is sometimes people need a reality check. It's funny how people copy each other like sheep. They're so sad and deceived. I don't like putting myself in physically awkward situations. So if I have to, I'll turn it into a big joke. I've missed opportunities by being unobservant. So with that, yeah, you can see how like a lot of IMPs, they can really like reject SE's, you know, desire to actually directly experience things. And then they'll pretty much like ridicule, like, yeah, you know, like just like kind of like how I said, like, oh, well, let me go ahead and like scuba dive then, I guess, before I can write a book about a fictional scuba diver, huh? No, I don't have to do that. I can just watch this documentary or I can just read about it and understand it conceptually, and then I can like, you know, write about it in that way, which to an extent, yeah, it's true. But you can't apply something like that to all situations. Like obviously you do have to directly interact with life in order to be able to understand a lot of things in life. And I think that that's how I mainly see it with INPs.
That's a great way of explaining it, Denzel. Thank you. Yeah, what I think I've seen the similar kind of thing. I know an INFP who's just like, I don't need to go experience real things. I can just imagine them. And you know, why can't what I imagine be just as real as what's in the real world? Like it's just as valuable. And I mean, it is just your imagination is just as valuable to a degree, but like it's just this complete rejection of like real world experience being able to prove anything that their imagination hasn't already proven to them. And I've noticed this general like condescension towards ESP. So ESPs are often really like physically expressive, spontaneous, kind of like action oriented people. They're very I don't know what they were like, playful and like physical. And I've noticed that when INPs are sometimes around them, there's this just like, whoa, that person's just a child. And again, when you're like thinking of someone as being very like just a child or childish, it's possible that what you're seeing is one of your child functions, either your tertiary or your trickster, because you're thinking that if you're thinking a certain attitude is childish, it's probably one of your child functions, and it could be trickster. You could be like this really loud, expressive, physical person who's just like running around being crazy, like they just seem like I don't trust that person. I don't think they're up to something, you know. And that's that kind of distrust of extroverted sensing, that distrust and that feeling of like that person seems like I don't know if I'd want to go with. They seem kind of manipulative and sketchy. So yeah, being conscious of like the kinds of people that you tend to project childish nature onto can help you to identify what might be your trickster or what might be your tertiary. But if it's in a more negative light, it's more likely trickster. More positive, it could be more likely to be your tertiary function that you're seeing in them, because we tend to be a little bit more drawn to people who have our tertiary function. All right, so let's look at trickster introverted feeling in ETP types. ESTPs and ENTPs have trickster introverted feeling. They may feel like introverted feeling types are manipulating or deceiving them. They may draw attention to people's motivations and values to trap them or get them off their back. Like, you deeply hurt me. What was your motivation? They may mock or make fun of people's sensitivities or deeper feelings. They may feel like people pushing them to evaluate their emotions and feelings are trying to trap them in a lose-lose situation. They may point out various values and motivations in a really subversive, quirky, or humorous way. At times, they may have fun exploring various belief systems or laughing at their own feelings. I wrote in past tense because you don't want to make an ETP laugh about their feelings in the present tense. That's usually not a good idea. So extrovert or ETPs. This is actually one that I've had a lot of experience with. I don't know why, but so they sound kind of mean when you say they mock or make fun of people's sensitivity or deeper feelings. Everyone, as you can see here, when we've gone through all of these, they can all mock certain people for different things. But when ETPs are around people who are really in an introverted feeling space, it can be hard sometimes for them to take it seriously. They're kind of like, what's the point of this? Like, what? Why are we getting all bent out of shape in our feelings over this or that thing? And so sometimes the way they're doing it isn't entirely intentional. But they can feel like when someone's trying to what I've seen in my relationship, because I'm married to an ESTP and he's told me it's okay to talk about this, but I've always done this thing where, not always, but I often do this thing where my introverted feeling child shows up in the relationship because that's how I want to be loved and supported. And I'll be like, let me try to get to know you on this deeper level. Like, what really matters to you? Like, how do you really feel about X, Y, or Z, these different things? And he would always get really tense during those conversations. And he would get really defensive. And he would get really the discomfort was just so evident. And I started learning not to have those conversations because I realized my effort to get close through FI, it would always go horribly wrong. And we realized we had a breakthrough, and I feel like I've used this example before, but we had a breakthrough this year actually, where he realized, when you start asking me those questions, I feel like you're trying to trap me. Like, I feel like you're trying to find flaws in me. I feel like you're trying to get me. He's like, I don't know what to say. He's like, I feel like no matter what I say, it's gonna be the wrong thing. And that's an example of how someone can feel. Like, for me, my tertiary introverted feeling was just this is how I want to connect with you and feel loved and close, is I want to know your deeper motivations and your deeper core feelings and values. So I'm not coming at him from I'm going to trap you and find out what's wrong with you. It wasn't like that, but because that's his trickster function, it felt like that to him. And once that was actually a huge breakthrough in our relationship, because once he realized that, he was able to be like, oh, when she starts, asking me about these things, she's trying to get close. And when he could make the mental connection that this is me trying to get close versus trying to find a flaw in him, it was a huge, a great upgrade in our relationship. And so that's just one way that can show up. And now, Denzel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It actually really goes in alignment, I think, with the inner dialogue. And I've seen this plenty of times with ETPs when it comes to FI, plenty of times. I watch it and it's just wow. Anyway, so yeah, the inner dialogue is, how do people determine convictions based on feelings? So many biases. I like to mess with people who feel strongly about irrational things and performance art. The more serious they get, the funnier it is to me. I struggle to know how I feel, so I don't think about it. Then, yeah, the next thing is, we need to stop coddling everyone's feelings. Your feelings aren't the only thing that matter. Poking at people toughens them up. I don't really consider how I'm feeling about anything, so they sneak up on me. I don't think anyone will accept the real me, so why care about it? So you can see a lot with this, because the ETP, I actually profiled the last profiling session that I posted on my channel was an ESTP. So for those who are going to go watch it, spoiler, yeah, it's an ESTP. But I feel like a lot of people were able to tell pretty early on anyway. And there's a part where the ESTP literally goes like I asked him, like, do you ever like, really tap into your feelings and like, tune into them and everything? He's like, nah. Like, I feel it. And he's like, yeah, I feel like that's dumb. Like, why would I do that? My brain is working just fine. Why do I have to tap into my heart? And he's like, the way that he's just like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. I know a lot of TP types in general, and especially like ETPs. I don't see ITPs do this much. And I think it's because for them, like, this function is, obviously like in a different position. But for ETPs, they really go out of their way to, like the quote said, or the inner dialogue said, almost like ridicule people with like strong convictions. So they'll usually like just state something that, is just an opinion, or it's just sometimes even just like a fact. Like, one example could be something like, yeah, back in the 1950s or whatever, like that, 1960s, whatever, Black people were not as smart as white people. Obviously, that's already like very problematic to say and stuff like that for obvious reasons. But from the ETP's mind, they're just seeing it as like, well, yeah, no, like they weren't blessed with enough, like they weren't, like, back then the school systems were not in their favor, and they weren't given certain textbooks that were allowing them to be as educated. And so it's not necessarily like an inherent thing that has to do with race itself, but it just so happens that because of what happened in society, then this is the case. And we need to examine why this might be, or like, why is it that men can do XYZ, but then women, they're not really like this. And so they're examining it in this way. But then as they try to examine it, then the FI user is like, oh, that's sexist, or like that's racist, or like whatever it might be. That's how, it sounds like to them. And I watch this interplay a lot, because then to the TP, they get frustrated and they're like, I mean, sure, I guess, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still examine it, that it's still not a thing. And now we're coddling these feelings because we're keeping ourselves from like looking into anything just because, oh, it's racist, or oh, it's this, but the truth is the truth, or like we should at least be able to like look at it. So then they start to like do the trickster thing. Oh yeah, we know. Let's just not think about anything. Like let's just make all of these things our convictions. So let's not really actually pick apart anything at all, because my feelings, I don't like how that feels. So let's just not do that. Let's not question. Well, right now, there's some of the examples that I want to bring up are just, very probably like triggering, but like there's certain examples like, let's not question this because my feelings or your feelings. But then when you really look at the ETP, then you really get to like see like, okay, the truth is actually like I don't really tap into my feelings with this. So I can't really relate to like how deeply like because I'm so detached from how racist this might be, or how sexist this might be, or whatever it might be in this sense. Then yeah, I feel like you should also grow a pair and allow us to be able to like get into this as well. But the real thing is them not being as tapped into their own emotional experience, and so then they view everybody else as like too overly attached to it, and then they feign, yeah, well, look at me, I'm emotional now too, and to like kind of like undermine that whole thing. Hopefully that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. Absolutely. I think it's a great example. And I was thinking also about I've seen Trickster Fi come to the defense of child Fe before also. So one of the ways this can show up is ETPs actually do care about how they're seen in a social light, and about they actually care a lot about that
Yes.
child Fe wants social validation and social approval, even if it's gotten in kind of a silly, playful way. And so if that's damaged in some way, so for example, say an ETP feels humiliated in some way, like socially humiliated, then the Fi can come up in this trickster way and be like, you've really hurt me deep to my core, and kind of like go after someone in that way. And I've experienced that and seen that also with ETPs, where it's like all of a sudden they get more, for lack of a better word, emo. They're not the types who are usually like really into their feelings and really like wallowing in them. But if they are like in some way feel slighted or humiliated socially, sometimes that can happen, where Trickster Fi comes up and it's like, you've really hurt me, and why have you hurt me in this like deep level? And then later on, after everything's resolved, they're like, actually, I don't know what I was talking about. Just don't. That wasn't. I was just don't listen to that. So that's one thing that can also happen, and it can happen with all the types. Is like if your tertiary function feels like humiliated, dismissed, disregarded, or whatever, and that's the function that you want to feel loved and supported by. The trickster function can show up in this way that like puts other people in the situation where they're, oh no, I really messed up and there's no way I can fix this. And so it's just because it's introverted feeling, sometimes it does look like I don't want to say like more, I don't know. I'm not going to finish that because I haven't fully fleshed out the thought in my own brain yet. But let's then move to trickster extroverted feeling. And again, I just want to put out a reminder out there. If you are watching this and you have a question, please feel free to leave it in the comments at any point. You don't have to wait till the end. You don't have to wait till any specific point. We do want to hear like what you have to say. Let's talk about trickster extroverted feeling. So this is for ISTJs and INTJs. They may feel like extroverted feeling types are manipulating them. They may mock or make fun of people who are expressive or, quote, working the room. They may point out the absurdities in social values or emotional reactions in order to get people off their backs. They may feel trapped by other social rules and then use social rules to trap others. They may point out emotional dynamics between people in a trollish, humorous, or subversive way. They may feel like pushing them to consider or express group values and emotions are trying to trap or deceive them. At times, they may have fun learning how to relate to others or laughing at their social mistakes. So I can speak as an ITJ myself that it's sometimes hard for ITJs to take extroverted feelings seriously. It's something that we may feel like, but they don't actually feel that way, do they? Like if someone's being really expressive and like responsive or trying to connect with you emotionally, sometimes you feel like, do they actually feel that way? Or are they just like, are they just messing with me? Because like it's that trickster function kind of can turn it into this manipulative thing. ITJs don't like feeling like they have to obey all these social rules and all these social constructs and take care of everyone's values and feelings, group values and feelings. They're kind of suspicious of that, and they tend to think it's a little bit silly a lot of the time. In my own relationship, as I just talked about in the last one, I'm married to an ETP. Well, I'm an ITJ, so unfortunately he has to deal with my trickster extroverted feeling. And so one of the ways this comes up is in defense of the introverted feeling. Sometimes when I'm trying to connect with ESTP, it's like I go to an introverted feeling space. It's just natural. So I'll be like, okay, I'm going to like talk about how I really feel about something, and how do you really feel about something? And this used to happen a lot earlier in our relationship, where I'd be like, are we gonna actually, like, let's just have fun, like let's just have a good time, like let's like connect and like be happy, like he wanted to bring the vibe up, because sometimes introverted feeling, let's face it, it's not always like the happiest emotion. Like it sometimes has kind of a like darker, more introspective look. Whereas extroverted feeling is much more about like connecting and improving the mood and like connecting in a harmonious way. So when I would try to connect with the ESTP, my husband, through introverted feeling, and he would respond with, let's bring the mood up. Like, let's try to do something. Let's just have a good time and like have fun together and like have good feelings. My trickster Fe would erupt, and I'd be like, yeah, that's right. Let's just have fun. It'd be like if I like the taste of alcohol, which I hate, unfortunately, I'd be like, let's drink. Like, let's just have a good time. I love you. You're the best. We don't need to actually know each other. Let's just have a great time. Like it would be kind of like I would like kind of mock Fe to like point out how like pointless I thought extroverted feeling really was. Like, yeah, we don't need to know each other or know how we actually feel about things. Let's just talk about how much we love each other and hug and stuff. Like, yay, this is so great. Like, it would just be this kind of like mocking extroverted feeling that was like pointing out how stupid I thought extroverted feeling was at that point in time. And just to, an FYI, if you're an ETP married to an ITJ, it can be really wonderful, but be prepared for your shadows to be fighting each other and playing with each other in potentially negative ways a lot of times. It'll mean a lot of growth for both of you. So yeah, I've acted immaturely in that way with my trickster extroverted feeling before, or had a hard time grasping the importance of extroverted feeling before as well. And so that's something that I think ITJs, if they have friendships and relationships with extroverted feeling types, even if they're FJs or TPs, they need to be conscious of this tendency to sometimes downplay the importance of that function and maybe mock it or make fun of it when they're not being careful. All right. So Denzel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, as someone who INTJs are actually my number one favorite type, so I can hold the space for it. But yeah, well, I guess I'll say the inner dialogue first. So the inner dialogue for the FE trickster for the ITJ is I see FE as manipulative and people pleasing. I ignore social rules if they're silly. When attacked here, I'll just use another silly social rule to counter. People's emotions are tiring and a waste of time. I create friction in relationships to get my needs met while ignoring others. I've seen that happen a lot. And then the second one is I hate manipulation, but sometimes it just works. I'll let other people believe it's their responsibility to get my needs met. If I commit social faux pas, I'm willing to act naive and clueless. That said, I've put myself in awkward situations if I fear my reputation is at stake. So again, I see that a lot with my fellow ITJs. I remember one in particular, like very much in particular, who she saw it as like, yeah, no, it's really dumb to like sustain relationships. But you know what? Since it's so important, well then clearly, like so now whenever like we would go a long time like without talking or something like that, which is funny because right now we've gone months without talking, and I've intentionally just not reached out to her, which would be so funny if she's actually like watching this right now. There's a chance that she could. But anyway, I had intentionally like not reached out to her or anything like that because I am like just seeing like how long can we go with you just like playing this game. But also she says that she just forgets about people, like and just pick up where you left off. And I feel like a lot of ITJs are like that. But anyway, if I were to say anything, like, man, it's just been so long since we've talked, and like I started the conversation the last time and the time before that, whatever. I guess it's my SI trickster probably being like, yeah, receipts, like I brought this up, whatever. But for her, it's like, well, I mean, you're the FE Dom, right? Like, and shouldn't you know like social norms and everything like that? Like, so isn't it your responsibility to reach out to me? And I've seen this with an ISTJ as well, like who literally said like, oh, well, you're again, like, the FE Dom, right? Like, so all of these rules. I don't know any of these things. So clearly, like, you're the one who's supposed to be responsible for like maintaining this friendship, for maintaining this relationship and stuff like that. And I feel like, yeah, like that's a big thing. Like they oftentimes really do not see the value in, keeping up a relationship and maintaining it in that way, because to them it's just like, well, why would I do that? Like what relationships are oftentimes like draining. Like I have other things to focus on, I have other things to do, and as a matter of fact, my favorite relationships are the ones that I do not have to invest in. that's a lot of things I see for ITJs as well. It's like, oh, thank God I have not watered that plant in years, but it's still just fine. We love cacti. So, and now when I need something from that plant, it's still going to provide the fruit that I need. Oh, low maintenance relationships are the best. And that's pretty much like how it looks like. But if you try to get on them for that, then it's a trickster thing. So, yeah. But like I said, they're my favorite type. So, I say all of this with love because understanding this about them made me be like, okay, like it is what it is.
Yeah, it's one thing is that the trickster function, your seventh function, it's really hard to really like use it for like an extended period of time. Like you will feel like you've just been run over by a truck if you have to like tap into it for a really long time. I don't know if you feel that way, Denzel. Like, I mean, I feel that way with extroverted feeling. Like, I enjoy, like, I care about my relationships. I care about the people in my life. But when I have to like be really responsive and like in this emotionally responsive, like harmonious
And
vibe
you've
with
done that
people.
for so long. We're not even going to get into that. Like with your history and everything, yeah, you used to think you were an INFJ. So, and it was
Yeah.
like, you hate FE a little bit too much more. Not hate, but like the way that you're using the FE, it is a little bit too much. Like all INFJs claim that they hate FE, but you really seem to not. like it really drains you.
Oh
Like,
yeah. Like
that's why.
and that's, you know, that's one thing I think we should do a video on at some point is TJ versus FJ, because I think a lot of people, like a lot of TJs get missed, and vice versa probably, because they both care about taking care of people and getting people's needs met. It's just they're going to do it in different ways. So anyway, but yeah, there's this every Friday, there's a co-op that I have to go to. It's like for my kids that, you know, I go and we learn about science and nature and things like that. But anyway, afterwards there's like 4 or 5 hours of just socializing with like other moms. And I mean, it's a great experience in a lot of ways, but I come back from that because I'm trying to be like really friendly and responsive and like small talk or whatever. I come back from that, I am the most drained I've ever been all week. I immediately feel like I just need to like sleep for a year. I mean, the whole thing is just completely exhausting. And you know, that's how, like, if you're friends with an ITJ, and I'm not trying to derail this and make it all about ITJs, but like, but they will, like, they may deeply care about you and love you, but it's like the minute they think about trying to like write that text message or have that phone call, something inside them just feels like it's like plummeting down through the earth, and they're like, I don't know if I can do it. And my husband's always making fun of me. He's like, all you have to do is like pick up the phone and be like, hi, how are you today? Like, or something like that. I'm like, oh, hell, that's so hard. So anyway, just, you know, yeah, ITJs can have a hard time valuing, like you were saying. They might just be like, oh, if that person uses FE, I'll just leave it to them. Like, they can take care of this. I'll take care of the TE stuff if they need help with that. But I'm gonna leave the FE stuff to them. I'll take care of TE if they need me to do that.
Yep. That's it. That's it.
All right. So getting to the trickster introverted feeling. ESFPs, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Trickster introverted thinking. ESFPs and ENFPs have trickster introverted thinking. They may feel like introverted thinking types are manipulating them. They may point out random logical inconsistencies in order to get people off their backs. They may feel trapped by technical variables and then use technical variables to trap others. They may point out the cold, hard truth in a dark, humorous, or subversive way. They may mock or make fun of people who are focused on technical variables. Just ignore the typo there. They may feel like people pushing them to take apart the logic of their ideas are trying to trap them in a lose-lose situation. At times, they may have fun learning mental models or frameworks or laughing at their own contradictory ideas. So EFPs, they like to be spontaneous and bring up new experience and new ideas all the time. And so when someone's like, you know, say you have an ENFP and they're like, oh, we could do this or that or this other thing. Look at all these amazing, innovative ideas we could create. And they're like, but have you thought about like the logic of that? Like, if you take apart this idea and really break it down into its components, the ENFP can feel like you're trying to like trap me in a situation where I can't win. Like, my idea, you just like totally dismantled my idea. I can't win. You know, and then they can push it back on the other person. Like, oh, well, have you taken apart the various components of this idea that you have? Like, did you dissect your idea? And like, I've noticed some logical inconsistency in your idea. Let me point that out. It might be one of the ways that you see that show up for EFPs. Denzel, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely see it the same way. So the inner dialogue for EFPs when it comes to that trickster introverted thinking is, it's weird to me when people spend more time defining things than talking about the point. I find it hilarious when people get pedantic in a fight. The more serious they get, the funnier it is to me. But I know I can get stuck in analysis paralysis and lost in a lack of clarity. And then the second inner dialogue would be, I'm always skeptical of people's information. Oh, you have a research to back you? You don't say. So does everyone else. I have a hard time knowing exactly what to think. So I tend to not share my opinions unless if they're values. It's not like my thoughts matter much anyway. And so that's usually where a lot of like EFPs are like coming from with that, because to them it's like, okay, you know what I meant. Like we're spending so much time trying to define the term and this that, but at the end of the day, like you know what I meant. So that's number one. And so now you're being pedantic, which I saw this also happen recently with funny enough, like this was actually happening with a lot of like TPs, but then the main culprit was an ENTJ. But anyway, it was still like a pedanticism. It was still a TI problem where it's like the ENFP was looking at like, a lot of like different systems and stuff like that and would say things like, oh yeah, like, so guys, like, what do you think about XYZ or like about this type? And then one of the people would be like, well, are you talking about socionics or are you talking about this? Or are you talking about OPS? And then the person was doing it in a way that was like, and it was kind of like interesting too, because though they both are kind of like not using TI in a way that's like that they really value it. But the ENFP actually hated it like even more, because now it was like it was seemingly like an attack on like what she believes and like and all of that, and like she was already like kind of like insecure in that area. And so now it ended up it's a lot to go with that, but essentially like what I end up seeing often is that the EFPs, like they really hate that like pedanticism, and they really love to just have people be like, what I mean. Like you like don't act as if like, oh yeah, because I didn't say the right word or because I don't have the right opinion here in this way, like just like the quote said, like, oh, I was able to back this up, and like, well, like, or somebody was able to back this up. Well, I could have also backed this up in the same way. And so, what's the point of really like just nitpicking all of these things? Is let's just focus on values instead. And I think that that's also where like a lot of times like the people who have like the ones that we had just talked about, with the ETPs, then they have like kind of like a little bit of the opposite problem, where it's like they don't think too much about their feelings, and so that's why they will focus a lot more on like the TI and like almost like the nitpicking in that sense. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good example. I've definitely seen that kind of interplay, and that heard those words. You know what I meant? Like, feeling perceivers get really frustrated when they're trying to communicate something, and then someone starts going into introverted thinking and like trying to define it or like further clarify what they were saying in like the fine details of it, because they're like, it doesn't matter if you use the wrong word or like if there was a better word, like just get the point,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be really frustrating for feeling perceivers, particularly EFPs, and they can do that back to them, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, what do you mean
Mm-hmm.
by this point? Do you want to? Should we get into what you mean by this word? And,
Right.
and
Yeah.
just give them a taste of their own medicine.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
All right, so we're on to the last one. Trickster extroverted thinking in ISFJs and INFJs. All right, so these types might feel like extroverted thinking types are manipulating them. They may try to organize or delegate to get people off their backs. They may feel trapped by external structures and rules and then use external structures to trap others. They may mock or make fun of people who are trying to control or organize their environment or push a logical objective. They may feel like people pushing them to be objective and follow standardized logic are trying to trap them in a lose-lose situation. At times, they may have fun outlining their plans, finding evidence, or they may laugh at their own lack of structure. So, and what I've seen with this is I've seen IFJs like in the background. If there's somebody who's like, say it's a boss or something like that, or someone running something, they're like, all right, everyone, make sure that you get started on this task at this time. We don't have time for hanging out around the water cooler, guys. We need to get started, get these done by this time. And they're like laying out in a very extroverted thinking way how the day needs to go. The FJs or the IFJs in the background might be like, oh, you guys better hurry up and get this done. Like they're mocking the TJ. for being TE. Like, oh, better not get, oh no, I'm at the water cooler. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's essentially mocking extroverted thinking because it's like hard for them to take it seriously. And that's one thing about the trickster function that I failed to mention earlier is sometimes it's hard for us to take it seriously. We may enjoy it sometimes. We may even think it's like, we may try to see the value, but sometimes it's hard for us to take it seriously. So with ISxJs, sometimes it's hard for them to take extroverted thinking seriously. When people are getting all, like when extroverted thinking types are like trying to organize their lives in the most logical way to reach whatever goal, the ISxJs can sometimes feel like, okay, like go ahead and do that, but you don't have any friends, so, you know, or something like that. And in turn, if they feel like people are encroaching in on them and they're trying to get them off their backs, then they might start doing extroverted thinking back to like, all right, well, I think it's time you clocked in. I think you're supposed to hand in this task at this time, you know, or, you know what I mean? Like, well, I think the evidence says this. You were like criticizing. So again, coming to the defense of introverted thinking, ISxJs actually really like analyzing things via introverted thinking and like taking apart an idea or concept or something and understanding how it works, like the components of how it works. This is why I think a lot of INFJs are into typology.
Yeah.
And so if someone comes in and is like, kind of dismisses their introverted thinking, then their extroverted thinking might show up and they might be like, well, you know, that like, say someone's criticizing their use of typology, like, you know, Myers-Briggs is just stupid. Like, you're trying to tell me all this stuff about cognitive functions. Well, I just think it's dumb. Like, everyone knows it's just like a BuzzFeed test. Well, the ISxJ might react with extroverted thinking and be like, well, did you know that, like, I don't know, 93% of the Fortune 500 companies use this? Did you know that? And then they start pointing out all this like empirical evidence to like trap the other person. So that could be some way that it shows up. Denzel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So first off, the inner dialogue that we have for the ISxJ when it comes to extroverted thinking trickster is, I see TE as controlling, so I undermine it by teasing, just like what Susan was saying. I put myself and others in financial/resource binds to force outcomes. If I feel attacked, I'll withhold or obscure information. I create friction in business arrangements. I'll criticize TE without allowing it redemption. And then the next one is, people don't always need to know what I'm up to. It's not their business. If they create a bad situation, sometimes you have to fight dirty. It's their fault for putting me in this predicament. They know how it works. If they didn't want me to act like this, they wouldn't have started it. And so a lot of times, kind of like what Susan was saying, like, yeah, like the ISxJ, they pretty much, it's the part of them that's kind of like, okay, like now I have to operate in a way that is strategically, you know, forceful in a way, because now it's like, okay, well, you know, I have no choice. Now I have to do this. I have to, you know, now I have to be the bad guy, you know, things of that nature. And a lot of times, you know, because they already see themselves as like the nicest person around, you know, and so now they have to like push themselves in that way. So I've also I also heard a story that Antonia had told about an INFJ who I don't want to butcher the details, especially with my Trickster Si, but I guess the gist of the story was that an INFJ pretty much was able to convince a company to invest in something that was pretty pricey of some sort. And then right as the company pretty much like bought into it, then the INFJ quit. And that really put like the company in a very like detrimental space, because the INFJ, I think, was actually in a position of leadership of some sort to help like guide this decision. So it's like, oh, like they had the plan and everything like that, but then they just like left. And so then now, instead of that plan helping the company, it hurt the company like really badly. And the INFJ did not know that they were causing this even to happen, like that they were leaving a fire behind them. And that's like a lot of like, you know, kind of like what can happen, where it's just like, it's something that they're not really paying as much attention to. But at the same time, kind of like they said, like people don't always need to know like what I'm up to, you know, it's not really like their business, even though sometimes like it is their business. but then when they have to like act in that kind of way, I see it as almost like the INTJ was like, hey, like, you're the one with the FE. Like, I'm not expected to know what I'm doing over here. The IFJ is kind of like in the same thing. Like, hey, I'm not expected, like, or you forced me to like be in this situation, so I had to make the decisions that I made. And that's kind of like how I see it so far, when it comes to that. But this is also something, like, I will say it's also something that I'm still patterning. But that's the best that I can find with that for right now.
Yeah, thank you. I always think you have lots of great insights from your own life, because I know like Denzel's an amazing coach, you guys. Like if you guys need somebody, he's great. And you've worked with hundreds of people just helping them to understand their type. So I know you've seen a lot of like examples of this. I always find it hard, like on the spot, to come up with examples, like as I'm doing these streams. So it's like sometimes I'm like, as I'm explaining them, I'm like, I wish I had like written this down. That's why I make the slides, so that I don't lose my thoughts in a jumble. But you're much better at coming up with those examples on the spot. So anyway,
thank you.
I just want to give anyone who is here the opportunity to ask any questions before we sign off. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to know what's on your mind about this. And maybe you need some time to process and need some time to think it over. And you're going to come, if that happens and you come up with any thoughts, feel free to leave a comment later after we posted this. I read all the comments. I don't get back to all of them right away, because sometimes I have like 3 kids on my lap at the same time while I'm reading them. But I always do try to get back to those. And yeah, we'd love to hear what you have to say. In the meantime, if you're watching this and you would like to know more about your personality type, I have written over 1,000 articles on type, and I have an article specifically about the Trickster function, and that's linked in the information for this video. You can click on that. If reading's more your thing, you can read that article about the Trickster function. I think I wrote that like 2 years ago or so. But also, if you want to find out more about your personality type, maybe you're not sure what your personality type is, or you want to get coaching on your type to understand how to be healthy, a healthier version of your type, I would definitely recommend talking to Denzel. He's an amazing life coach and an amazing profiler. Denzel, how can people reach out to you if they wanted to learn more about their personality?
Yeah, so if you go to denzelmensa.com, then you can find me there, and all of my services. So yeah, like I said at the beginning, I'm a life coach, personal development coach. So I help you to not only identify what your personality type is, but I also help you to be able to understand how you relate to your personality type as you. And then from there, I also help you to understand essentially how to become a better version of your type. I do a lot of like relationship coaching as well. And if you just also want to just like chat, about anything that comes to mind, I'm also down to do that. For my actual coaching, then, I'll dedicate like an hour to just being completely attentive to you with whatever your needs are, or if it's just casual conversation, and we can make that happen. So yeah, hit me up over there. And, I also have a YouTube channel. Like I said, I've actually featured Susan on there. We talked about the do's and don'ts of typology. So yeah, you can find us over there as well. And yeah, thanks again for having me, Susan. It's always fun.
Thank you for being here. And also, I put Denzel's website information in the information below this video. So if you want to click over to that, it's right there as well. I've had Denzel has helped me to narrow down my type. I've sent my kids to him, some of my teenage kids. Yeah, I really trust him. I think he's one of the very best type profilers out there. So don't miss that opportunity to get closer to understanding your type. And yeah, check out psychologyjunkie.com. I said that weird, but check out the website if you want more information. And next week's Thanksgiving week, so we are not going to be doing a live stream next week, but in 2 weeks from now, if Denzel is available, we'll be talking about the 8th and final function in the function stack. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then on December 14th, I have Richard Owen joining us from the British Association of Psychological Type. And he's actually a Jungian analyst who's studied the shadow functions a lot. So put that on your calendars, because you don't want to miss that. He's going to be talking about the shadow functions overall with us as well. So yeah, thank you so much. everyone for joining in. Thank you, Denzel. I hope you all have an amazing weekend and a wonderful holiday for those of us who are in the US. For everyone else, I hope you're having a great week next week as well. So thanks so much, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Yes, thank you all. See you.
Bye, everybody.